Welcome to all.
All right, so we're going to talk about orcas. The killer whale that's really not a killer whale, not like you think it is, which is a good thing. So we're going to get started with the evolution of whales. I don't know if anyone was on the call last time with the humpbacks. And if you were, this is just a little refresher because I think it's important to understand the evolution of whales and the fact that they it's a very rare occurrence. We all, as the land mass has formed and the waters receded, all life came from that primordial soup. The whale is the only one that we know of that came from the primordial soup, developed on land, and then went back into the water. So this is just a little quick courtesy of the Smithsonian, the evolution of whales. So the evolution was pretty quick. 48 million years ago, they were land mammals. Their nostrils were very far forward on their nose. They were like a large dog, and they lived on land. They ate on land. The reason for evolution is always because of food. So either climate change made it more difficult for them to find food, or they were more predators after them. But at any rate, they began to go back into the water for whatever reason. So after Pakicetus came Ambulocetus, ambulo meaning walking. So it was a walking whale. Cetus is the Latin term for whale. They got longer, got kind of lower to the ground, got a little bit less mobile, but they were still mobile, using their hind legs. They didn't have any tail flukes, but they did have a tail. And probably was in the shallows eating whatever vegetation and so forth they could get from there. Fast forward another couple million years, which is really quite fast in the overall view of things. Mayacetus then began to spend more time in the water, still was on land. Used those hind legs for propulsion. So still was able to walk on land, again, it was continuing to lengthen out. Shorter forelegs that could still use for walking, but also for propulsion in swimming. And the hind legs, we still don't have a tail fluke, still have a regular tail. And again, we're gonna fast forward a bit more. And now we have a whale that is Durodon, which is in the water. So they have made the transition. They have lost their forelimbs. They spend all their time in the water. The nostrils are beginning to move back on the head, even further back. And the reason for that is it's easier to breathe if you're just coming up for air, to have the nostrils farther back. They got longer. They still had little legs, but they really were not used in any way. And in the modern whales, today's whales do have hip bones, and they are still there, even though they no longer have legs attached to them. Spent more time eating the aquatic, whatever they went to eat. And then Lanocetus, again, all the time, nostrils move further back on the skull again. Now he's using his flukes for propulsion, completely aquatic. And this happened over about 14 million years, which is really a very short amount of time in the overall scheme of things. We'll talk a little bit about the difference in feeding of whales in a minute, but the nostrils are far back on the head, so they just have to bring the back of their head out of the water in order to breathe. They don't have to come all the way to the surface. And that's the beauty of how they have evolved. So real short evolution, very quickly evolved, started in the water, came to land, went back into water. The only animal that we know that did that. And so all the whales today all come from that one common ancestor. The evolution at the time of Durodon then split off into two different groups. And the last time I talked about humpbacks, the Bagoptera novaangliae. Those are mysticetes. So the mysticetes are baleen whales. There's 11 species of those. They're the larger of the whales. They have a completely different feeding system and a completely different family system than toothed whales. So we're going to concentrate on Odontoceti, odonto meaning tooth, ceti meaning whale. And there are 6 families, but there's 65 species because that includes both dolphins and porpoises as well as whales. So that's what we're going to concentrate on this little branch of our family tree for whales today. Just a little visual of size-wise. Largest mammal ever on the earth is the blue whale. A lot of people think, oh, well, dinosaurs were pretty big. Well, the biggest dinosaur was only half the size of a blue whale. The orca is a small whale, and in actuality, the orca belongs to the dolphin family. It's the largest dolphin. And the difference in whales and dolphins is essentially size. So it is in the family Delphinidae, which is the dolphin family. And then, of course, we are down here in the corner. We are just tiny compared to most of the world's animals. Lots of whales in the world. A lot of baleen whales. Here's our little orca over here. He's pretty small in size, but he is the largest of the dolphins. So toothed whales. We're going to talk specifically about toothed whales, and they all share some common characteristics. One being the dorsal whale, or dorsal fin, and that's very important in the orca, and we'll see why in a few minutes. Toothed whales have a single blowhole. Baleen whales have 2. They have 2 nostrils just as we do. Orcas only have 1. All toothed whales only have 1. They have what's called the melon here, and that's very important in their echolocation, how they find prey, how they feed. There's a sonar capability for them. They have teeth, and we'll look at their teeth in a minute. Everybody else has the same type of configuration in terms of flukes and pectoral fins and so forth. Oops, we seem to have hung up. All right, over here. There we go. So the orca has teeth, and I recently ran across an article written by a lady that should know better and talks about chewing. Whales don't chew their food. They don't masticate like we do. The reason for teeth is to grab their prey, keep their prey from swimming back out. So there's no chewing involved. And you can see the orca teeth, they're about 4 inches long. They kind of tilt backwards to keep whatever they're after from swimming back out. Down here is the lower jaw, which is, they're a very bizarre looking whale, really, of a sperm whale. So this is the lower jaw, this is the upper jaw, this is the top of the head. And they are also toothed whales, and they have family structures, just as the orcas. We'll talk more about that. And their prey is giant squid. So they are the deepest divers of the whale group, and they grab those squid off the bottom. These are teeth of a beluga whale, the little white whale that's up in the Arctic. They are kind of cool little whales, and I like them because they are one of 2 species of whales that has no fused cervical spine. So they can nod their head, they can wag their head just as humans do. So they're kind of unique in that fashion. Another toothed whale, which is pretty cool, is the narwhal. This is actually a tooth. It comes through the upper jaw, generally on the left side. Generally, only males have them. No one knows the function of that tooth. It's pretty cool looking, and they were the beginning of the unicorn myth. We don't know what they're used for. There's been speculation about fighting, but there's never been any evidence of that. Certainly, it's not for spearing fish, because you couldn't eat it off the end of your nose. So it's kind of a neat whale. And just back to the sperm, this is where his jaw is down here. This is the deepest diving, second deepest diving marine mammal, can stay down for a couple of hours. This is your Moby Dick whale. So they have a family structure just as orcas do, although not quite as defined. A lot of the toothed whales are very family oriented and stay within families. There have been documentations of female sperm whales diving to eat while there's an ant guarding the babies at the surface. There'll be female whales watching the children as the mothers go down to feed. So any questions at this point? That's just a quick overview of toothed whales. Okie dokie. We'll move on then. So just some fun facts about orcas, because they're just a really unique little group, and we'll do a deep dive into them, but just some facts about them. Baby orcas have whiskers when they're born. Whiskers fall off very quickly, but they are there, probably again left over from the time that they were land dwellers. There is some thought that they were to be able to understand the direction of water flow and that sort of thing early in the evolution. They've been around for about 6 million years, roaming the oceans. They've been here a long time, predating humans. They have the second largest brain of any animal. They are very intelligent. They have, we're going to talk about their vocalizations, very big brain, learn a lot of things. It's a tough world out there for baby orcas. They're only about half of them survive their first year. That's pretty much the same as most babies in the wild, but orcas have a tough time of it. We're going to talk about the different types of whales today, the different feeders. We're going to talk specifically about resident whales and how they survive. Their main source of food is salmon. They need 385 pounds of that a day to stay healthy, which is why we're going to talk about some of the challenges for them where they live. They have a unique dorsal fin and a unique saddle patch, and we'll get into that in a minute. And it's how we identify the whales individually. When you're doing research on whales, you have to be able to identify individuals. You can't say that every orca does this behavior. It may be one orca doing it 100 times, not 100 orcas doing it. So you need to identify each individual, identify the behaviors, and associate those two together before you can make any real conclusions on things. They're the oldest known known orca, gosh, that's hard to say, was Granny. Granny was around 105 years. She was first sighted in the 1800s. She died in 2016. There have been, she was easily identified because of her dorsal fin. She lived off of Seattle, which was a pretty busy area. So fishermen have reported over the time that this J-pod Granny was 105 when she died. Every orca population has a unique language, and we're going to talk about that. It's different than humpbacks. We talked about humpbacks in the last lecture and how they have an evolving song. It's different. Every orca sings, or every humpback sings the same song. It evolves over a season and changes by season. That's not true of orcas. We can trace back orca language for hundreds of years. Orca calves are not black and white when they're born. Orcas are beautiful little whales. They really are pure black, pure white, absolutely gorgeous. Babies, however, are kind of pinky orange when they're born. The white spots are not pure white for the first year. So they are some of the most contaminated animals on the planet because of where they live, especially the southern pod that we're going to talk about today, live off of Seattle. A lot of pollution in the water. It's absorbed through their the prey that they eat. It is stored in their fat. Now the females offload it a little bit when they have calves. It's offloaded to the calf. The males keep it their entire life. The other animal, a sea animal that is equally as contaminated are the beluga whales. They live in the St. Lawrence Seaway, some of them, and they are treated as toxic waste. If they die, they have to be, people have to wear hazmat suits to clean up the body. They only sleep with half their brain at a time, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. Southern resident orcas, those living off of Vancouver, the J-pods, about half of their population were taken for places like SeaWorld and those dreadful aquariums. We'll talk about that later as well. A lot of problems with military sonar, underwater explosions. Hearing is extremely important to all whales, but especially so to orcas. These kind of underwater activities that are being done are damaging the hearing, and it's a real problem. So some physical characteristics that are specific to orcas is this the big dorsal fin. So it's about a 6 foot tall dorsal fin in an adult male. It's made of cartilage, so it is flexible. It does wobble around when they are in the water and they swim through. The other really important thing is the saddle patch. There are 3 different kinds of whales, orcas. There's more than 3 actually that we're going to talk about today. The saddle patch is important because each individual not only has a distinctive dorsal fin, but a distinctive saddle patch. Since we see these 2 things every time they come up, they're very easy to identify. All of the catalogs of orca whales, all of the catalogs of pictures taken, they're all, we arbitrarily decided, scientists, on photographing just the left side. So it's easy to see which whale is which. We don't look at the underside of the dorsal fin. It's not specific to an orca as it is to a humpback. So we're not really concerned about that. There is a little bit of difference in the eye patch. The eye patch is important as well. It's especially important to the baby whales because they kind of narrow in or zoom in on the mom's eye patch when they're swimming up to the mom to nurse. If they kind of make a beeline for the eye patch, they're going to end up underneath the mom where they need to nurse. Females and males look pretty much the same except for the dorsal fin. Dorsal fin is much taller, twice as tall. The female is shorter and it's also more curved. Other than that, they look pretty much the same except for size. The male is in the toothed whales, the males are always larger than the females. So there are 3 distinct groups living off of our study area, which is off of Vancouver Island. The first are resident killer whales. And why I say that they're not all killer whales, there's some thought that when the first fishermen saw this whale, they saw the transients and they do kill other whales. They will stalk other marine mammals and whales. And so we think that they were called whale killers and then it somehow got transposed into killer whales. There's a large resident population off of Vancouver Island that are piscivores. They eat salmon. They do not eat other marine mammals. They do not eat anything but fish. That's it. And the resident population is one of the most studied populations of orcas in the world. There's a second group called transients or bigs, marine mammals. We'll talk about why they were called bigs later. These are the marine mammal eaters. They will eat seals, they will eat porpoises, they will eat baby whales, they will eat occasionally a deer. There was a documentation of a deer being taken that was swimming between islands and the transient opportunistically had a little deer meat meal. There's a third group called offshores. These weren't discovered until late in the 1980s. We didn't know anything about offshores. Offshores are on the Pacific side of Vancouver Island, and they are far off. They sometimes hundreds of miles out to sea. We don't know a lot about them. We do know that they primarily eat shark, not other marine mammals. So it's an interesting group, and it may have something to do with breeding. We do know that the residents and the offshores share a lot of genetic material. The brigs or transients are completely different genetically. So there is some speculation that these two, the residents and the offshores, actually are involved in breeding events. We know that the residents in the wintertime sort of disappear. And we're not really sure where it is that they go, but the speculation is that they join the offshores on the Pacific side of Vancouver Island, and that's where some of the mating occurs. Transients are separate from them. Transients do not mingle with each other, with other groups. They are completely separate from offshores and residents. There's a comparison of the dorsal fins. Now, I have to admit that I'm not one that can, at a drop of a hat, look at a dorsal fin and say I know exactly what that type of whale is, because they're quite subtle. So our resident whale has kind of a curvy, rounded type of dorsal fin. Our offshores, it's still rounded, but it's a little less curvy. And then our transients, it's a much more pointy dorsal fin. The other thing is that the residents have what's called an open saddle patch. If you look here, there's some black bleeding into this white saddle patch. Transients have a closed saddle patch. You'll never find any black in their white spots. And offshores, it's kind of a combination. Sometimes you see a little bit of black bleeding into the saddle patch. So that's another way of telling them at a glance what kind of a whale you're looking at. Vocalizations are different for the whales. We'll talk about those as well. And then just recently, we had photographic documentation of a different type of killer whale that had been identified, strangely enough, in 1955. In 1955, there was a mass stranding of these very unusual looking orcas off of New Zealand. There have been anecdotal stories about this weird looking orca from fishermen down near Antarctica, but no one had ever really seen a lot of them or knew much about them until 50 years later. So 2005, a French scientist was down in Antarctica and was able to actually film this type, they're calling them type D sub-Antarctic dolphins or orcas. And as you can see, the eye patch compared to our resident dolphins is very, very small. They have a very rounded head compared to our rather sleek slope here. Don't know much about them. They're still studying them. NOAA just recently got some films of them, so more will be known. And they did get, this was 2018, so it was relatively recently that there was anything really more found out about them. And they did take a genetic sample that has not yet been reported out on. So there's some things down there that we just don't know about. The ocean's a big place. Populations, our residents along Vancouver coastline, we have a northern community and a southern community. So the northern community stay along the coastline of Vancouver Island and north from Vancouver City up north and up almost to Alaska at times. Mostly they stay right in the area of Vancouver Island. There are 3 clans, the A clan, the G clan, and the R clan. Their numbers are increasing. There's between 240 and 260 of those. This is as of last year. The southern clan, the community rather, are off of Seattle. Their numbers are decreasing. They've had a really rough time. There's a lot of pollution there. They do not mingle. They will sometimes come into each other's territories, but they do not mingle. They do not interbreed. And that's part of the problem with the southern community, is that they have no one to breed with except their own group. And so you're going to find a lot of genetic problems there. And there have been noticeable genetic problems. Our northern community, like I said, probably breed with the offshores. So the numbers are increasing. They're fairly healthy. And we'll talk more about clans in a minute. Our transients, there's about 400 of them along the coastline, Vancouver and north into Alaska. They seem to be increasing. They are a very solitary group. They don't intermingle with anybody else. They're a much quieter group. They're in smaller groups. The offshores, we don't know. We think there's around 300. That's a guess. Don't know if they're getting larger groups or not. They're deep ocean animals, so we don't see them very, very much. Orcas are pretty much worldwide distribution, but they tend to like colder waters. You don't find a lot of orcas. I've never seen them in Hawaii when I've done my humpback research there. They just generally like the colder climes. So this is Vancouver Island here. Robson Bight, which is the big ecological reserve here. So all of our orcas are tying kind of in this area that we're going to be talking about today, our northern residents. And just a closer up this is a real heavy presentation of them. They will go down as far as Vancouver Island, but most of them stay up, starting in Johnson Strait and up through Blackfish Sound, all along the island here. Hansen Island is where there's a very large Orca lab research group there. Dr. Paul Spong is there, and Helena Simon, and they have done extensive work over 50 years now with orcas. This is the Robson Bight, the Michael Bigg Ecological Reserve. Now, Mike Bigg was one of the first people to actually do a lot of study on orcas. He's the first to have identified transients as being different from residents. And so that's why they're called transient or Bigg's orcas. He did a lot of work on vocalizations, a lot of work on behaviors. Sadly, he died of leukemia in 1951, or at age 51, and he wanted his ashes scattered here at Robson Bight. And the day that they did that, over 30 orcas showed up that day to swim around the Bight, which was kind of interesting. So this is the area that they inhabitate. Hansen Island has a set of hydrophones and video cameras underwater in this area too. And they have a wonderful website if you're interested, that's live all the time. You can check out there and see if anything's going on. So the Orca Society, orcas are, most toothed whales, but specifically orcas, have a very, very tight structure. They stay with their families throughout their lives. All of the baleen whales are solitary. The only association in baleen whales is moms and calves for a year or so. Orcas, on the other hand, it's a lifelong commitment to the eldest female in the group. So that's the matriline. The mother and all the offspring. So the eldest female runs the show. She decides when they feed. She decides when they sleep. She leads the group. She is the main character. With her are all of her children, male and female. She runs the show until she dies. When she dies, any of her daughters move off and form their own pods with their children. So if she has two daughters, they will each split off and take their children with them. Sometimes the males will stick with one of their sisters. Others, they actually just go off on their own and become bachelors. And there was a very famous bachelor group. Unfortunately, the last one just recently died. Mom was Sophia. She had 3 sons. Craycraft, Cakish, and I can't remember the third one, but they were very well known because they were huge males with huge dorsal fins, and they were the bachelor brothers. And you would see them all cruising around, and periodically they'd hitch up with another pod because the pods do get together, but then they would go off on their own. And so it was interesting to watch those 3 boys kind of hang out together after mom passed away. So the matriline is the mother and the offspring. Then matrilines get together to form pods. So those are related matrilines. So we have the A pod, which has A26, A36, A37. There's a lot of different matriarchs out there with their offspring. They'll come together and they will be closely related and they will form a pod. Then a clan is a bunch of pods coming together that all have acoustic traditions, and we'll talk about their vocalizations in a minute. But they will come together as groups, and sometimes you'll have different pods. So you'll have the A pod, the G pod, the R pod, and they will form clans and they will get together, and then they form that large northern community. So for instance, if you can see this, you may have difficulty, but the pink, strangely enough, is for girls. So this is the A30 matriline. So this is the A1 pod, the A clan. So way back when, in 1927, Nicola was born. She had a daughter and a son. Her daughter was Sakita, and she then went on to have 3 sons and then 2 daughters. Her 2 daughters then, when she died, her daughter Cleo took her children, her females, her males, and one that we weren't sure. They're sometimes hard to identify when they're first born because either we don't see them again or it takes a while for their dorsal fin to grow large enough. Her other daughter, Blinkhorn, went off on her own, took her daughter, who then had 2 children, and an unknown, and then there was a son as well. So these guys split off and formed brand new matrilines, the A50 matriline and the A54 matriline. So they will then sometimes get together as a group with their clan. Orcas are pretty athletic, excuse me, whales. They will do all kinds of interesting things. They're quite energetic. One of the things that they do is spy hop. They have pretty good eyesight, both above and below the surface of the water. It's pretty murky water there. They have to be able to see pretty well, but they will sometimes come up and take a look at you, see what's going on. So spy hopping is a pretty common behavior you'll see. Here's a little baby spy hopping, and I threw this in just because you can see that they're kind of pinkish. They're not quite as white, bright white yet as mom and dad white might be. Breaching is another thing they'll do, and again, we don't know why. It's one of those behaviors that causes a lot of water to be displaced and makes a lot of noise. So maybe they're just playing around, maybe it's for attention, whatever. But they're such beautiful little whales that you just, they're just stunning when they come out of the water. And as you can see the saddle patch here, if you remember what I said, open saddle patch is a resident because you've got some black breeding into it. So that would be a resident whale. And I'm just going to show you a little film clip here of a breach. Some breaching. This happened to be a baby whale. And she was learning to do her acrobatics and doing a little tail slapping on the way down. There has been some evidence of using tail slaps to stun fish. But she was having a good time. It's always good to have children have fun. Tail slaps, like I said, we've noticed them doing that for fish. This was just for fun, apparently. This guy's laying on his back. You can see the very white belly that they have and the white under the tail, and was just laying on his back, slapping away. Don't know why. It makes a lot of noise. It's just a fun thing to do, I guess. Behavior, sleep. Sleep is a very unusual thing in whales. Whales, we are unconscious breathers. We're mammals, we breathe air, but we do it unconsciously. Our brain doesn't have to tell us to take a breath. We have other internal organs that trigger our lungs to take a breath. With whales, because they were land dwellers and then went back into the sea, they actually have to remember to breathe, which means they can not fully sleep. They cannot be fully unconscious. So what they do is they sleep with one half their brain at a time. They sleep with one eye open. That's the side of the brain that's awake. The eye that's closed is the side of the brain that's asleep. And they, at times, go back and forth. So that way they're completely rested. And the reason for one eye open is for predation as well. You don't want someone sneaking up on you as you're sleeping. They will sleep in a line. They will always be sleeping in a line. The matriarch, the mom, the first whale of the matriline will determine when it's time to sleep. And when they're sleeping in this line and they come up for breaths, they're moving very slowly. It's just a very slow movement forward. It's not, they're not swimming along. They are swimming, but it's very slowly. And they will just be just below the surface, and then they'll come up and take a breath. And when they do that in this line, they will do it in order. So it might be number 1 whale, the number 3 whale, the number 3 whale, the number 5 whale. And they go through the group. Then they'll come back and it'll be number 1 whale, number 3, number 2, number 5. They will continue to breathe in the same sequence. It's really amazing to see. How they know to do that, we don't know. But it's a very unusual thing with their sleep behaviors. And this happens to be a little film clip of a group that was swimming and sleeping. And And you can see just very, very slow movement, a little bit of up, just enough to take a breath, just a little movement forward. And you can see how close to the shore they are here too. But just not a lot of jumping around, just enough to catch a few Z's. And here's a big male coming up. You can see his big dorsal fin. And then suddenly, for some reason, they decide to wake up. Maybe there's a signal in some fashion. Mom says it's time to go, and then off they go. They're just gonna turn on the jets, and away they'll speed off. And they'll start traveling again to feed or whatever they're leaving for. And you can see they just pick up speed and away they go. So, any questions at this point before we go on? Because we're going to get into some vocalizations.
Worldwide, how many clans or the biggest populations are there?
Echolocation. So the way that they feed is by using sonar. They have in the melon here. We talked about the melon. And they don't have vocal cords like we have. They don't expel air, but they do send out sound through this melon, and they send it out, and they sonar blips go out toward whatever they're looking at, and then they come back to the whale, and they come back through the lower jawbone into the brain, and the brain then is able to tell the orca what's there, how far away it is, how big it is, how fast it's moving, that type of thing. The same way that sonar works in submarines. And that's how they stalk their prey. It works for both the resident whales, the transient whales. They all use echolocation for that. And it's a clicking sound. I didn't find a good video or, audio of that, but it's just a simple click. It's a click, 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 click. And the closer they are to the item, the faster the clicking is. And we had on one of our trips, which was really fun, we always lower hydrophones all the time, so we can hear what's going on when we're not when we're underway, but when we're stopped. And we could hear this clicking sound, so we knew that the orca was echolocating on something. And it got faster and faster and faster, and all of a sudden we heard this big clunk. The orca had been echolocating on our hydrophone and swallowed or tried to swallow our hydrophone. So here we were on the boat trolling with an orca. Well, eventually he spit it out because he realized it wasn't a fish, but it was kind of an interesting little adventure. Unfortunately, we didn't tape it. It was one of those things. But that's how they find their prey. That's probably how they do some of their traveling as well. And they can mix echolocation with calls as well. So one of the most interesting things about the orcas is that they have a very developed language. Humpback whales sing, but their song changes, and it changes, and they all sing the same thing. Orcapods all sing something different and communicate differently. And we don't know if there's a syntax to it, if they put together sentences, if there's certain things that they do in certain times. We do know that they vocalize more when they are excited. We know that the transients don't vocalize much at all. And that makes sense, because if you're a silent killer, you're not going to want to alert other marine mammals that you have them in your sight. So you're going to be quiet. However, they do vocalize quite a lot after they've made a kill. So I'm just going to play you some little tapes of different sounds. So this would be our transient. This is after a kill. Oops. they don't have to, transients don't seem to have quite the array of sounds that our residents do. Offshores haven't been recorded a lot, partly because they're deep ocean animals and they're hard to find. The residents and even the transients, because they maintain an area right along the shores of Vancouver Island, are easier to find. Offshores are sometimes hundreds of miles, but they were able to be caught at one time with a little vocalization. Our J clan down the southern community, J clan, they have their own little language as well. These three clans, A clan, G clan, and R clan, have probably been the most recorded vocalizations of all whales. And your whale researchers, when they hear them, can tell you not only the clan, but the matriline and sometimes individual whales that have been doing this a long time. John Ford from the Vancouver Aquarium is probably the foremost authority, and he can hear one or two squeaks and tell you what whale's talking. But the A clan is, I always call them the wee-o whales. To me, it always sounds like a wee-o, wee-o. So we'll hear what they sound like. And here's the echolocation in there too. I'm going to save the best till the last. So we'll listen to our clan. And my favorite is G clan. And to me, they sound like a donkey. And so, and there will be a quiz at the end of this, by the way. So this is G clan. And to me, for all the world, G, it's a donkey. So those are the difference in vocalizations. We don't know what they're saying to each other. If it's a signal. They do vocalize more when they're excited, when they go into Robson Bight to rub, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. But they're pretty vocal whales all the time. They're not silent by any means. So we're going to talk about the rubbing beach at Robson Bight and in a couple other smaller spaces along the shoreline. There are areas where it's very shallow and the bottom has very smooth stones. It's the only place in the world where we have documentation of whales coming in, orcas coming in to rub at the beach. And it's only the residents, not the transients. They will come in, sometimes in groups. I was lucky enough, privileged enough to see a superpod come into the rubbing beach on my first trip out there. There were more than 100 whales coming in to do this. We don't know why they do it. If it just feels good, if it has some sort of courtship ritual, we don't know. These are fast swimming whales, so they don't have barnacles or whale lice or anything. So why do they do this? And we don't know, but it's an amazing thing to watch. So again, back to where Robson Bight is. This is where the rubbing beach is. It is a reserve, ecological reserve. It was named after Mike Biggs. It is closed to the public. You can't go there. You can't beach there. You can't be within a certain, on a boat, proximity to it. But Orca Lab does have overhead cameras in trees there. So they have caught some of the activities. So here's where the beach is. The Siskina River comes through here. This is where the salmon run. And this at one time was in danger of being logged, which would have destroyed that stream. Because the ecological reserve was made, that was stopped. So that's a good thing. So this is this was taken by a group of young men, and they were camping. And this is not at the Bight, but it's just down the way from the Bight. So it was another very shallow beach. And you'll see how close in these whales come. So this was them. You can see the tail fluke is there. They generally lay on their side. You can kind of see the stones on the bottom. As they come through, they lay on their side and use their tail fluke to swish them through. There'll be a couple of really good views of the big male coming in. There's 2 or 3 whales there. And they don't come through fast. They come through slow, just as like they're just kind of enjoying their little adventure. Here's the big male coming. There's the female. And then the male behind the 2 females. And they're just right there on the beach. You can see the whale's dorsal wobbling the male because it's so tall. And here's these guys. You can see how close they are. These whales are coming right up to them on the beach. And here comes the big male heading right in. And this whale is right at the shore. An incredible capture. I mean, they were just incredibly lucky to see that. You can see the big paddle, the saddle patch there. This is an underwater view. This is one of Orca Lab's cameras. They're underwater cameras, just so you can see what it looks like on an underwater thing as they scoot through. Again, you can see the pebbles on the bottom, and they'll just scoot on through and rub. It's always on the side. They just zoom through and take a little rub. We've had people ask, when can we see them rub? Whenever they get around to it. They don't make an appointment, they just come through and give themselves a little rub. It's pretty amazing stuff, I think. In terms of Northwest Coast, First Nations people, the killer whale is quite a revered animal. You'll see them on totems. This is at Alert Bay. They did a beautiful carving there. One of the resident artists did welcoming you. You can tell on the totem, most of the totems have, depending on the First Nations group, some attach things. Some carve them right into. There's a lot of jewelry. It's they're revered. The Tlingit clan, the Tsimshian clan, Haidas all have their family clans are killer whale clans. Some of them. So quite an honored animal out there. Greatest threats, as with everything, pollution obviously is a big thing, which is what's killing off the southern tribes, the chemicals in the water. Noise pollution, like I said, they need to be able to hear. The vocalizations are important. The echolocation is important. So they need to be able to hear, and the boat noise through there is unbelievable. When those cruise ships come through, when we have to pull the hydrophone out, you can't stand the noise. It's absolutely unbelievable. Entanglement, there are fishing events out there where they put out big nuts. The orcas are pretty good about staying out of them, but they do sometimes get entangled. Orcas were hunted there until as late as the 60s. No whale is the best whale is a dead whale. Fishermen thought that there were millions of them and that they were stealing all the fish. And it wasn't until we were able to do research and identify them individually that we realized there aren't millions of them. There were hundreds of them, if that. Climate change is making a difference because of the changing habits of their salmon, and the ecology in general is just changing. Ship strikes, again, orcas are pretty good. They're pretty fast swimmers. They can hear well. They will avoid the big ships, but it does happen. Toxic contamination, because they do keep the toxins in their blubber. Logging in British Columbia is a big thing, because logging destroys the salmon streams. And that's their primary. You saw that earlier that they take 300 some pounds a day to stay alive. So they need the salmon to be there. Fish farms are a problem, especially salmon fish farms. If you've ever read up on fish farms, you will never eat another farmed salmon as long as you live. It is absolutely dreadful. And occasionally they escape, and then they breed with the natives, and the natives die, and it's an ugly situation. And there's a bunch of them. Alexandra Morton wrote a wonderful book on that, and it has sworn me off of any kind of farmed salmon. Don't ever eat farmed salmon. It's awful. I always have to throw this in because it's probably the saddest picture I've ever seen. Orcas in captivity. You notice the dorsal fin. You do not see this in the wild. You see this in captivity, because the whales are so extremely stressed. These are animals that swim 100 or more miles a day. The currents in the water, the tides, help to keep that dorsal up. They are confined to small tanks. They can swim in circles. That's about it. They are forced to vocalize for shows. I equate that with forcing us to live in a telephone booth and scream at the top of our lungs and drive yourself crazy. Orcas don't belong in captivity. They just don't. SeaWorld has done a horrible job of taking care of their animals. Most of them have. Do not give them their business. I beg you, please do not ever go to these places. It is absolute torture. It's absolute torture. Okay, so now time for our quiz. And you can just put your answer in the chat if you want, or verbally, whatever. I want you to name that tune. So which pod is this? The A, the G, or the R? Oop. Okay, anybody got an answer? Which pod was that? Which clan?
We have 2 G's.
Absolutely. Good, you're listening. It is the G. G, it's a donkey. I love that one. All right, so we're just going to end with just a little short clip of how beautiful it is in British Columbia. Wasn't the nicest day in the world, but it was a good day to get just some. We were in a sailboat, so we were not under power. It was quiet. The whales were just swimming along with us as we were sailing. And you'll see a little baby come flipping up. Big male there in the middle. Just swimming along, doing their thing. I love when the males come up. There's a couple of males in that group. That little baby again. They do their little quick flips. They're just magical to watch them as a group like that. All right, any questions I can answer? There's a lot of stuff online. If you're interested, Orca Lab's probably a primary source. They have underwater cameras. They have underwater hydrophones that go 24/7. They have a little chat blog thing if you're interested in asking questions. Helena monitors it. Some of her research assistants monitor it. So if you have questions for them, they're always happy to answer.
Chris, on the transients, are they where they're transiting from where to where?
Just up and down the island. They probably roam a little further. They're the teapod, and we've seen the teas in Alaska. So they are transient between the southern coast of Vancouver Island up all the way to Alaska. They'll go back and forth. They don't always stay in one area like the residents do.
And in terms of groups throughout the world, are there other major groups in New Zealand and places like that?
Yeah, there are. They have not been studied as much as the residents off of Vancouver Island, partly because it's more difficult. There's a lot of big pods off of Iceland. Norway has big pods off of there. They're in the southern climes as well. Like I said, they tend to be more cold water animals. You don't find them so much near the equator. But yeah, they're pretty much a worldwide distribution.
You mentioned that one of the groups, because of inbreeding, I think you said it has some genetic issues. What sort of issues?
We haven't been able to really identify all of the issues, but we do know that some of their calves seem to be more vulnerable. They have a 50% mortality anyway, but they had a calf last year, 2 years ago now, that just died for no apparent reason. They just don't seem to be as healthy as other calves. Their mortality rate is much higher. So the thought is that it's genetic. What was sad about that little whale is that the parents, the mother, carried it around on her snout for days. The body kept bringing it up for air. When she got tired, other orcas came in and did the same thing, took the body, brought it to the surface to see if they could get it to breathe. It was really, really sad. It was a very sad occasion. And part of it could be pollution as well.
So then, in terms of the other orcas, do they not breed with one that's related to them, or how does that work?
Correct. Yeah, that is a social structure with them. They will not breed within their own family. So your A36s, none of them will breed with their sisters. Sisters and brothers don't breed. They might breed with other clans within the residence. So an A pod male may breed with a G clan female, or they may breed with offshores, which is why they're genetically, DNA-wise, somewhat related. but they will never breed within their own family unit. No incest in our whales. Any other questions?
I was wondering, have any of the orca species been harvested by humans? Some perceived benefit?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
I was just wondering if any species of the orca were harvested by humans for a perceived practical reason.
Oh, no, they're not. They've never been used for food consumption by humans. One thing I forgot to mention, which I always find interesting, is that they have pretty much the same lifespan as humans. They become sexually active in their early teens. They have babies until about 40. Orcas, female orcas, actually have menopause. And the males usually live until they're about 60 or 70, and females a little bit longer, sometimes up to 100. So there's only 3 marine mammals that we know that have that go through menopause, and orcas are one of them. They've only been really harvested for aquariums, where they were half of the J-pod was at one point captured to populate aquariums, and they were shot because the fishermen thought that they were stealing all the fish. So that's the predators. Their only predator really is a human.
Do they generally just have one calf at a time?
Yes, always. Yeah. And it's about 3 or 4 years between them. Humpbacks can have a calf every year to 2 years. With orcas, it's generally 3 or 4 years in between calves. Anything else?
Great, Chris. Appreciate the insight you provided us. It's very interesting to compare these whales to the humpbacks. There's quite a difference.
It is, yeah, yeah. They're both great groups. If you ever get a chance to see them, I highly recommend it. There's some great whale watching groups off of Vancouver Island, especially in Telegraph Cove is a great place to go. So it's morphed over the years. It started out as a sawmill, and now they've got condos, but they've got a couple of really great whale watching groups there that go out on either the Lukwa or the Geekami, and very, very knowledgeable. They share all of their information with the scientists. So we appreciate that kind of cooperation with the commercial people. We learn a lot from them too.
Do the commercial fishermen operate in that area?
Yeah, they do. Yeah, and we've been there when there have been big fishing derbies going on, not derbies, but fish openings, where they'll have a very short period depending on the stock of fish or the estimation of what's out there. We've been out there. It's a rodeo when it happens. It starts at a certain time, and the marine patrols are out there to make sure they don't start early, and the gun goes off and they all fish like mad, the commercial fishermen. But they have a very short window to do it, so they have to get as much as they can in that period. So it's kind of wild.
So they're fishing for salmon.
Yes. Yep. And the Chinook are the preferred salmon for our orcas. They'll eat other things, but they really like the Chinook. So got to keep those streams clean.
Right. Any other questions for Chris? Great. Well, thank you, Chris. Another great presentation. And we will have it available on YouTube in a couple weeks.
All right.
Thank you.
Enlightening. Thank you.
Have a great day, everybody. Stay dry tomorrow.